Hey guys, welcome to my video where I share my favorite books from the last 4 months of the year. This is my third trimester of books that I'm sharing. I know it's weird, like we only use the term trimester when we're talking about pregnancy, but this is how my brain splits up the year, so this is how I'm doing things. So I'm sharing books from September, October, November, December that are my favorites. And in probably like a week or two, I'll be sharing my favorites overall from the year. The one thing that I've noticed as I was looking through the books that I read in the last 4 months is there was not very many favorites. I feel like some of these trimesters I've had like 15 books on them and it was kind of hard to narrow it down. I didn't even get 10 this time. I didn't realize that I wasn't loving a ton of books, but apparently that's the season that I was in. So we're not going to go in any particular order other than I have one nonfiction, so I'll save that for the end. The rest is just fiction and then nonfiction. So I guess I'll start with the books that I have here in front of me. I actually don't own a copy of this one. This is my place marker. The Elusive Mrs. Polifax I read a couple months ago, and so that one is book 3 in a series. I only own 1, 2, 4, a whole bunch more, but not number 3. And I think that is the best Mrs. Polifax in the series. And I will say, people do ask me, I do think you should read the Mrs. Polifax books in order. Some characters kind of pop in and out, it seems, and especially the first book needs to be read first because you get to know her start, which if you haven't heard me talk about it or heard about the series before, Mrs. Polifax is in her 60s and I don't know when her husband died. Like, she's a widow and seems to have been for a while. She's just like mildly depressed. I think she has 2 kids. They live away from her. She's kind of bored. She goes to the doctor and he's like, isn't there anything like you've ever wanted to do with your life? You know, maybe to make you a little bit happier? And she goes, yes, I've always wanted to be a spy. So the next day she goes over to the CIA and applies to work for them, and through a series of kind of like unfortunate circumstances or like different things that go on, she becomes a handler for the CIA. And in the first book we go with her to Mexico, then the next 2 are behind the Iron Curtain in different countries. And Mrs. Polifax is a smart lady. She's not the lady that's bumbling around making mistakes like you would think Inspector Gadget or something like that. She's actually really smart, but people don't judge her. They don't expect a whole lot from her because she is just kind of this older lady. They talk a lot about like her big hats with like things on them that she wears. It's just kind of her thing. So she sounds kind of like what you would think of as a stereotypical older lady from the 70s would look like. And she surprises so many people. In almost every book there's a character that's like, I thought you were a nice lady. Like, people are just blown away when she's not afraid to move dead bodies around and get her hands dirty. It's such a fun series. Another one that I loved, and here's another point. The way I grade, star rate my books is based on my experience, enjoyment reading it. But sometimes I will mark a book 4 stars on Goodreads, and then when I'm looking through my books that I read, somehow this book I rated 4 stars, but it's ending up on this favorites list, and I think there was even a couple of 5 stars that didn't make it onto this favorites list. I don't know. It's just, have they stood the test of the few months? Am I still thinking about that book? And this one I am. This is My Plain Jane. So this is the second book in the Lady Janie's series. I still never know what it's called. I think it's called Janie's or The Janie's. I don't know. This is a historical fiction, fantasy, alternate history, kind of not really a retelling of Jane Eyre. So she is one of our main characters, so is Charlotte Bronte, and then we've got a couple other characters, and Jane can see dead people. And what I've realized is I like books to either be real or not. Like, this book didn't bother me, but I've realized if a book, there's totally a name and I'm totally blanking on what it is, but if it's like totally real but like somehow ghosts or different things can happen, unless it's like a supernatural, like a Christian supernatural type thing. But if there's just all of a sudden like there's this mystery and it's all like, oh, it was a ghost, that I don't like. But if the book is full of ghosts, I'm cool with it. Okay, the future me is popping in. I just barely came back from a walk Before that was my Patreon book club, and I remembered the word thanks to Lindsay, who was talking about it. And then it totally disappeared because Tolkien is being weird. Magic realism. I want magic or I want realism. I don't want them together. I don't want the whole plot of a book just to be because of magic realism. That's what I'm trying to say. So Jane can see ghosts, and one of them is her friend. It's a girl that was at the, what is this? Like the school that she went to, died when she was younger. So this is based a lot on like Charlotte Bronte's upbringing, the school that she went to. And this is just such a fun read. I really enjoyed it. I'm actually very disappointed they don't have a like Jane Austen book in this series, because that would be really cool. Another one of my favorite fiction books was Defiant. So this is book 4 in the Skyward series, where we follow Spensa. She lives in space, in this like colony that has always been attacked by aliens. So the people in her colony, they're all humans, but there's different aliens that attack them often, and she wants to be a pilot to fight the aliens because her father was one, and he got labeled like a traitor or a coward or something. Something happened, and it's kind of sketchy because it's kind of on the down low with her father, and so she wants to kind of become a pilot to redeem the family name, kind of. And then lots is revealed through the series. I personally liked book 1 and book 4 the most, but now I'd kind of like to go, knowing what I know, I'd like to go back and reread the series and see all the different things, the little Easter eggs that Sanderson is like planting in book 1 and 2 and 3 that you kind of find out about in book 4, because he's really good at that. I feel like I can't say much about book 4, but I do recommend this series. Oddly, that is all for books I own, and I didn't even own The Elusive Mrs. Polifax. So, looking at my list here, okay, this is probably like my favorite fiction book that I read in the last 4 months, and that is A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. So this would be probably considered a cozy fantasy story, except that it's also quite dark. So we follow this 14-year-old girl, and true to form, I totally forget her name. She is like what she considers a minor wizard, so she has some magical powers, but hers are all to do with baking. So she can kind of like infuse dough and tell it to not go stale or rise more, or like not burn in the oven, like, you know, quite minor things. But unfortunately, it is the minor wizards in her city that seem to be disappearing and or getting murdered. Right in the first sentence of the book, I think it was, she walks into her aunt's bakery where she works, and there is someone dead on the floor. And we find out through a series of events that this is a minor wizard, and so our main character's life is kind of at stake, but she wants to figure out if she needs to flee the city or if she needs to figure out a way like to find out who's killing these minor wizards, how to fight back, how to stay alive. And I had like zero idea about this, like what this book was when I was going into it, and so my expectations were low, which is usually a good thing, and I was just blown away. I loved it. And if you guys have watched my last few videos, or I've had a lot of videos since then, but in some of my videos since I read this book, I've talked a lot about how I want to read more of T. Kingfisher's books, because A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking just shocked me, blew me out of the water. So hopefully she's got some more books that are on the same level. I'm afraid she won't, but I'm tempted to, or I'm hopeful and definitely going to try them. Oh, I do own this book, but I left it upstairs because it's on my classics shelf. It is Emily Climbs. So this is book 2 in the Emily Starr trilogy by Ellen Montgomery, and this is my favorite in the series. So Emily is a lesser known character than Ellen Montgomery's Anne. Everybody knows Anne. Emily is a little darker, also an orphan. She's not as bubbly as Anne, which in some ways I love that about her, because that first book, Anne is quite annoying. She's a little, as somebody that talks a lot, like she was even getting on my nerves. And Emily is more serious. She goes to live with 2 of her aunts and 1 of her uncles after her father passes away, and she wants to be a writer. And in the second book, Emily Climbs, she's like high school age, and I really enjoyed watching her kind of try to become a writer, especially because I think Ellen Montgomery took a lot of her own personal experience and infused it into Emily. And so I was thinking a lot about Ellen Montgomery and the struggles that she had to go through to get her stuff published. I would be very curious to know how much, like which of those events were all true. I have read some Ellen Montgomery like biographies, the House of Dreams one and stuff before, but it's been a while, so I don't remember exactly, but I really enjoyed it. I didn't really enjoy the close of the series. Book 3 was definitely not my favorite, but I do recommend reading that trilogy. Apparently I was just bad at getting books because I think my daughter owns this one. See How They Run. This is also the second book in a trilogy by Ali Carter. So I read book 2 and 3 as well this, wow, I was really finishing the series this trimester. And this one, our main character, Grace. So I'll kind of just tell you a little bit about what happens in book 1 because there are some big discoveries and each book ends on a cliffhanger. So like have them ready if you're going to start. It is a YA, it's almost like, So Grace, I can't think of how to describe it. I'll tell you about it and we'll see if we can think of a genre. Grace goes to live with her grandfather. He lives on Embassy Row. So this is where all the ambassadors for the different countries live in this like fictitious country. Grace saw her mother get murdered, I think like 3 years prior. She's about 16 now. I think it was right around when she was 13. And she spent a lot of time in the psych ward on medications. Like she's really struggled. Like Ali Carter, she can write like humorous one-liners, but then also just like sucker punch you because you realize how much these characters have struggled. She's really good at that. So she saw her mother murdered, and then as she comes to this country where her father her grandfather lives, she sees the man, the scarred man is what she calls him. He's the one that murdered her mother. And so much gets revealed, you guys. And then the ending, wow, I can't tell you because it's spoilery. It was so good. And then the ending of book 2, also so good. The wrap up felt a little flat to me, but I still recommend that series as well. Then my last fiction book, I actually don't know how to pronounce. It's Calor or Kalur or however you pronounce that one. This is a fantasy story published by Enclave. And in this one, our main character, her name is Stephanie. I can actually remember one. She is a mem, I think. I don't remember what she was called. Maybe that's what it is. She can, like, when she touches people, she can kind of go into their mind and she can help ease people's memories, like their pain of their memories. So often she has to go to the mayor's house who's done some atrocious things and help wipe his memories a little bit, but as she does so, she kind of also takes them on for herself. But she's a servant, so no one really cares that she's having to do all this and be burdened herself. And you could also take memories and bottle them, and people kind of drink them instead of, like, it's kind of the world's alternate to alcohol, although I think alcohol is also a thing, but more so people want memories. And this is a dystopian book. So our world has passed away years ago, but there's like remnants of it. There's little things that they remember that people have said about our world. And right at the beginning of the book, then Stephanie's friend, slave disappears, and someone offers to take her away with him to get her out of this situation that she's in, and she takes a risk and goes, and there's a lot that unfolds. So I've read the first 2 books. I think Lumen the second one just came out a couple months ago, and then waiting for the third one to see. I think that's going to wrap it up. I think it's a trilogy. See how that ends, but I've been really invested in the series. Okay, now we are on to my one nonfiction, and I just read it this month. It is Hidden Christmas by Tim Keller. And what is the subtitle? There really should be rules. If there's a subtitle, the sticker has to like go over. I don't care that he's the New York Best Times selling author of. I'd rather know the subtitle. The Surprising Truth Behind the Birth of Christ. So this is a tiny book. It's like 140 pages, and it goes through the birth of Jesus, and it's such a good read at Christmas time because we're hearing the birth of Jesus, we're hearing the story, but he goes so much more in depth and points things out that it's like, oh yeah, right, like I hadn't thought of that before, or different things. So highly, highly recommend it. I will talk a little bit more about it in my monthly wrap-up, which I think my December wrap-up should be the next video after this one. So I would love to hear your favorite books from the last few months, and then coming up I will be sharing my favorite books from the year. Thanks so much for being here, guys.